If you could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, next we'll have our land acknowledgement. As we gather for this meeting, let us take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place, and in doing so, recognize the various traditional lands on which we do our business today. We wish to acknowledge this land on which this SPC meeting is taking place. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Hohokam, the Akimel Oram, and most recently, the Salt River Pima Indian community. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Maricopa, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. Okay, so today's meeting will begin with our standard question and answer with Dr. Menzel. And then we're going to hear from Shannon Cron about social workers in SUSD schools. And then we'll have some executive board updates, and we'll end with announcements, any announcements that our SPC reps have. Okay, so if anyone else has a card that they have for a question for Dr. Menzel, please bring it up. Or because there's so many in here, you can raise your hand. Okay, so the first question is, does SUSD perform any mosquito prevention or removal for schools?
Well, this brings back memories from last year when we had mosquito issues. And so the district does not, the city sometimes does. Part of what we have to do is watch for any places where there may be standing water, which sometimes is a strange thing to think about in the desert, but recently we've had more. So we don't treat for mosquitoes, but the city does. And there's a website where you can look and see when they do that. And I don't know if they've done any now. I know they did last spring in April and May.
So they don't come on school campus to do it now?
I don't believe they do it on, I think it's aerial.
Okay, this morning you had a forum, right? What were the take-home points from the State of Education in Scottsdale?
So the Chamber of Commerce was kind enough to host a State of Education in Scottsdale event. The presentations were first, the key sponsor was First Things First, Melinda Gulick, talking about early childhood education. I just think that's a really important plug, period. So thanks to Melinda and her presentation. Then Dr. Eric Lashinsky from Scottsdale Community College, the new president, talked about all of the things that are happening at Scottsdale Community College and what makes them unique, what things are on the horizon. So that was the first part. And then I was the cleanup hitter, talking about what's happening in Scottsdale Unified. So ran through everything from our strategic plan, quickly touched on mission, vision, values, spent more time reviewing our academic achievement data. If you haven't seen the presentation Dr. Bachna and Dr. Benson did 2 board meetings ago, you can look at that to see what's there. The PowerPoint, I think, should be on the website as well. Long story short, there are some people who have said that we're failing as a school district. If you look at our most recent AASA and ACT scores and you compare with 9 other districts in the North and Southeast Valley, so 10 districts total, we scored number 1 in 9 of 14 tested grade levels. We scored number 3 in another 4 of 14, and we were number 6 in one area. So when you look at that comparison, we always do far better than the state average and the national average, and in many cases, we're 20 points better than the state average. So I got to talk about achievement. I did acknowledge, like I have repeatedly, we know that there are opportunities and areas for improvement. So middle school math continues to be an area of focus for us. We also know that our science scores are far lower than what we want. So we're continuing to spend time addressing those issues. Science curriculum, secondary science curriculum, is a topic for review this year anyway. So there's an opportunity to review scope and sequence and put some things in place to ratchet up our science curriculum and instruction, as well as our math programming. But those are some of the things that we talked about. And then we spent a little time just talking about the 5 areas of the strategic plan, our strategic action teams, because the plan for us is not just something on a shelf, but we're really planning to move forward quickly. But I also spent some time talking about all the good things that are happening in Scottsdale, because we can't let the negative drown out all of the good that happens every day with 21,600 students.
So you scooped my last question, which was how do we rank relative to other peer districts? So thank you. Okay, does anyone else have a question? Emmy, you have a question? No? Okay, all right.
I don't normally bring a getaway bag, but I'm heading over to the Saguaro Coffee House event, so I figured I would just be ready to hit the car from here. But as always, thank you for being here. Thank you for your continued advocacy for your students and our schools, and I wish you well for the rest of the meeting tonight.
Okay, so the topic of tonight's meeting is social workers. We're going to hear from Shannon Cron about what they do in our schools.
Hello? Perfect. All right. And then is it okay if I just push? I don't know if the presentation is pulled up. Yeah? Okay. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you so much. Perfect. Thank you. All right. Good evening. Thank you for having me tonight. My name is Shannon Cron. I am the Director of Support Services for Scottsdale School District. This is my 22nd year in the district. So I have been everything from a teacher to a school psychologist, and the last several years I've worked in support services. I'm also a proud SUSD parent, so happy to see all of you here tonight supporting your students. So I thought it would be important to just share with you a little bit about just support services in general. So that will help you have a better understanding of social workers and really what our department entails. So in support services, we oversee counselors, our crisis response. So anytime we might have a crisis, situation, whether it's a death of a faculty member, a student, significant issue on campus, we respond with a crisis team. We have expulsion and alternative to expulsion, so oversee all of the discipline, code of conduct, those referrals, any kind of bullying complaints. So those are typically handled at the site level, but when maybe a parent doesn't feel like they're being heard or they want additional support, they would contact support services. We oversee threat assessments, so students that might pose a harm or threat to themselves or others, so risk assessment, threat assessments. We oversee McKinney-Vento, home instruction, homebound, so students that have either a physical or medical impairment, which is preventing them from being able to attend school. Mental health in schools are multi-tiered systems of support. Section 504 for students that are, again, have maybe medical, physical impairment, so they have an accommodation plan in place. Oversee social workers, again, student discipline, and then trauma-informed primary prevention grant. So we've got a lot of, different areas that fall under support services. So we're a small department, but we support a lot of different areas. What was it? Yeah. So really, the focus of our department is to look at how do we reduce barriers to improve academic achievement. And so when I talk about social workers tonight, I think the message that I really want to make sure that comes across is that we are not, conducting therapy on our campuses. So our social workers are really there to help remove barriers, support students, support teachers, so that students are able to access education and learn, okay? Just to give you a little bit of background, you may have seen there was a letter that went out tonight having to do with SABRS. So that is one initiative that our social workers, help oversee. And a couple years ago, really kind of coming out of COVID and how everything has evolved, there was a lot of question around how are our students doing and how do we know? And the reality is there's a lot of information, that's out there that has been shared with us in regards to some of the impacts that COVID has had. But we didn't have any real data to answer, how are our students doing? And so across the country for years, there's a lot of districts that have conducted social, emotional, and behavior screeners. It's something that we've always been interested in, but it would be highly unethical and probably not in the best interest of anybody if we were to conduct a screener and then not necessarily have the supports in place to address the needs that we find. And so the last couple of years, we have been able to hire social workers. So we were the recipients of the Arizona School Safety Program grant. So we have been able to hire 26 social workers to support all of our different campuses. We have a couple social workers that are split between schools, but most of our campuses do have a one-on-one social worker. So last year was the first year that we implemented the social emotional screener. And again, it's helping us answer, how are our students doing and how do we know? So it looks at academic risk. It looks at social, emotional risk. So basically, are our students able to make meaningful connections with adults, with their peers on campus? It looks at, whether or not students are, at risk for academic behavior. So are they coming to class prepared? Do they have the skills to be able to benefit from academic instruction? Do they know how to find their work? Do they know how to organize their thoughts? Can they get started? And then also looking at, emotional stressors. And so are our students able to regulate their emotions? Are they able to adapt to change? How do they handle some of those, stressful events that might be, show up in a classroom? And what we learned last year was that our students in 3rd through 12th grade scored themselves as, indicating that they had some risk in that emotional risk area. And so really what that tells us is that students are sharing that, yes, they are experiencing more stress than normal. They're having a hard time adapting to change, that they have some stressors that are impacting them. And so what we do with that information is we bring it back to our campuses and, present how do we address these issues. And so, for example, if our students are saying, I'm stressed, maybe we implement mindfulness Mondays. Maybe we teach students test-taking strategies. So how are we going to support the students in that classroom environment in order to remove some of those barriers so that they're able to deal with some of the stressors, they're able to deal with the change? Letting students know if something is going to come up where, their schedule is going to be thrown off. You have a school-wide assembly, today is not going to look the same as it does on a typical Wednesday. So those type of things can be really stressful to some students. Some kids are fine with it. They can just go about their day with, throwing changes at them all day long. So it really kind of depends on the students. So we look at it from that tier 1, how are we going to better inform our classroom practices and our school-wide practices. So that information is not used to make decisions about individual students. If a student is referred for additional support, it would go through a process which is called the intervention planning team or an MTSS team. And parents are a part of that team. They would sit down with the school team and have a conversation and look at all different types of data. So look at academic data, they would look at, maybe visits to the nurse, they would look at health history, anything that could be going on in that student's life, and then that SABRE score as well. And so that would be one piece of information that the team would consider when determining what sort of meaningful interventions should be implemented. So just want to share that with everybody just because I think right now we're in a time period where we need to normalize the want and the desire to address some of these social emotional needs. And so we screen for academics, we screen for hearing, we screen for vision. We also have the ability now to screen for some of the social emotional behaviors that we are seeing on our campuses. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, sorry. That was just the number of students at that time. So we only provide, we only screen, students only participate in the screening if parents have given us permission. So in order to give permission, you have to actually go in and acknowledge the code of conduct, which, as you know, parents are asked to do every single year. So a lot of parents do it, but that's an area that we can, improve upon as well. So there's a lot of parents that don't go in and acknowledge the code of conduct. So it's not that people were necessarily opting out or saying, hey, I don't want my student to participate. We just had a lot of families that did not go in and acknowledge the code of conduct. This year, it's not the first year that we're doing the online verification. So I think people are a little bit more used to, being able to go in online and acknowledge code. And that's where you would say, yes, I'm okay with my student, participating in student assistance programs. I have media release, yearbook, press. So there's 6 or 7 different things that parents have to acknowledge in the code of conduct. And it falls under there. So if a parent is saying no, then we would not have them participate in the screening. Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
All right. So this is the first year you said, or last year was the first year for the Sabres. And
Yes.
so I'm curious, how many years has it been there? And I know you said you're not doing it individually, so you're doing like a common risk and how you assess that, right? So is Sabres been around for like 10 years and there's a common recommendation to apply and then they remeasure every year and see its impact? Like, how do you conclude what your approach is going to be based on the results?
Okay. So it's a screener. So it really helps us identify where the needs are across the board. So if we see that, for example, we've got a high number of students in 3rd grade that are, demonstrating some social, like some risk in the social area, right? We might go into that 3rd grade classroom and work with that teacher, work with the students in that classroom to have them, learn how to interact. Ooh, I think the battery maybe.
Hello.
All right, thank you. To be able to provide some, direct social skill instruction or, help students learn how to navigate challenges so that they're able to get along with their peers. Maybe implement some structured activities on the playground, so students not only are given some direct instruction on how to make friends, how to sustain friendships, but now they're given the opportunity to practice and provide social coaching at that same time. Sometimes what we learn is, that students, again, they've got, pretty strong opinions, right? And maybe they don't know how to necessarily, navigate a difference in opinion. And so playground is an area where, we see that come to fruition. And so, minor aggressive acts on the playground tend to be very high in elementary. So some of our schools have moved morning meeting to after recess. And so what they have is, their morning circle, but now it's, a classroom circle, and they have the opportunity to talk about something that happened on the playground. So-and-so said this, I didn't like the way it made me feel, and they can work through it as a classroom community. So those are, the ideas and the strategies that we bring back. And so our social workers will present this information, at a staff meeting, and then say, I want to, have the opportunity to meet with grade level teams or individual teachers to go over what that classroom data is telling them about, the students in their classroom and what ideas or supports could really be helpful. Again, there might be a student where, there's a difference between a can't do and a won't do, right? So we've got students that participate in the Fast Bridge, academic screeners, and maybe they performed very low. Well, when you pull them in, it might not be an academic need, it could be a behavior. They're just not going to do it. So if we give them more and more reading, that's not really addressing the underlying issue. The underlying issue is more behavioral versus academic. And so that's what it does, is it really helps us have a better understanding. So we're not going to make individual decisions about students based on one score. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. Oh. So in regards to our social workers, what they really help us do is to implement that comprehensive support system. And so when we talk about a comprehensive support system, we're really looking at that 3-tiered model, which if anybody has ever heard me speak before, I talk about it a lot. But that tier 1 is what we call universal instruction. And so that is where, all of our teachers are teaching universal behavioral expectations. We teach students, that first best instruction, academic instruction in the classroom. We're trying to differentiate, make sure that everybody has access to what would be considered first and best, right? So every single person has access to that information. We know that most of our students are going to respond, to that classroom instruction, and they're going to be fine. They don't necessarily need more. But then we do have students that have some pretty significant behavioral issues, or social emotional concerns or academic concerns. And those are students that might need more than what they can get in, that day-to-day classroom. So they're not only going to get that academic, and social emotional support through their classroom teacher, they're also going to get small group instruction to target a specific area of need. So that's where we look at that yellow area, which is tier 2. And then we've got students that are going to need even more. So the more intense, individualized, instruction, maybe higher frequency, and that's that tier 3. So when it comes to our social workers, how they support our schools is really looking at more of the social, emotional, and behavior. So our social workers, I think maybe one of them has a background in teaching, so they're not necessarily there to, step in and provide academic support. What they're there to do is to really help provide, that social, emotional, and behavior support. So at that tier 1 level, they help implement, those PBIS or those school-wide expectations. So maybe they push in. If we notice that, again, a certain classroom is having a difficult time on the playground, they might go in and say, hey, we're going to teach, how to play soccer, but the Laguna way, because you guys are all on a million different club teams and you all have a different way of playing. So let's come up with the Laguna way of how do we play soccer. So they might go in and teach that lesson. They go in, they might teach whole body listening. How do you listen with your eyes, your body, your mouth, your nose? I mean, I don't know about nose, but hands. What does it look like, to practice whole body listening? So they will go into, our classrooms. They also help support the community. So if there's a specific situation where maybe PTO, PTA is saying, hey, we want to learn more about, the opioid epidemic. So they would contact, me or Not My Kid and ask if perhaps we could schedule a special presentation. So they do work with parents. They often present to the PTOs and PTAs, provide those opportunities, for more community or school-based presentations. Sometimes we've got parents that are saying, I have no idea how to provide homework support. And it's not that I can't do the academic part, it's I just don't know how to set up, an area in my house. And they'll provide, ideas or homework strategies. So whatever that area of need is, working with the school team or the PTO, they oftentimes provide those different types of presentations. They are also, and oversee really this SEL screener. And so they're presenting this information, to the school teams. And then they have been asked, one of the things that we really want to avoid is being data rich but information poor, right? And so bringing this information back to their campus to say, here's, what we learned about our students overall. Here is what we can do with some of that information. And then offering to go and meet with, again, grade level teams or individual teachers to take a look at, their classrooms and provide some of those ideas and supports. So they give that presentation. All of these things are happening at that tier 1 level. And we've definitely seen an increase in behaviors this year. COVID has evolved, and I say our needs are going to continue to evolve. So lots of externalizing behaviors. So our social workers have been key in, supporting our teachers, being able to go in there, be another adult, to help support, provide function-based, ideas for a classroom, and just be another adult on campus so the teacher can teach and perhaps they can, redirect and provide support when needed. That tier 2, our social workers are really in charge of check-in, check-out. And so when we've got students where maybe, attendance is a huge concern right now, just across the board. Or, they've got these low-level, defiant, disrespectful, behaviors, or maybe they're just not engaging in, bringing homework back to class, they're unprepared, whatever it might be. We've got students that are on what we call check-in, check-out. And so this is a very low intense, intervention where students would go and report, to social worker, maybe in the beginning of the the day. They would go over their individual goals. They receive a lot of positive feedback, like, okay, so where did you, put your math homework last night? Great, can you show it to me? Oh, awesome job, you've got it done. Okay, so where are you gonna turn this in at? Because a lot of times kids don't know, right? So giving them those little reminders, giving them lots of positive feedback. And then at the end of the day, they check back out and they look at, what their goals were and whether or not they met their goals, and providing that, reinforcement for, okay, great, we're going to keep this up. We're going to do the same thing tomorrow. Or, hey, look, it looks like you did really awesome in these areas. Maybe, we could try the same thing, in English class, right, that you did in math. So it's all very positive, reteaching kind of some of those behavioral expectations. But our social workers are the facilitators for that intervention. The student assistance programs, those are really what we call psychoeducational support groups. So again, most of our students are going to respond to that tier 1, but there's going to be some students that are not. And so we have a handful of students that, really kind of struggle with anxiety, or that are struggling with, different types of stressors in their life. And so they might teach a healthy coping strategies. We might have students that are really struggling with, how do I make meaningful friendships, right? I don't know how to approach somebody. I don't know how to engage in a two-way conversation. Or I post really inappropriate things online, right? And nobody wants to be my friend. So they, facilitate like friendship groups or social skill groups. So there's lots of different, different groups really kind of based on, the school and what those individual needs are. We've also got alternative to suspension. And so they will often run, an alternative to suspension group maybe during lunch. So big believer in, we can't remove a student if a student is continuing to act up during, recess or playground or in the classroom. We can't remove them from, what would be their opportunity to practice some of those skills, right? That's like somebody, struggling in reading, and rather than, addressing the reading, we take it away from them. And so alternative to suspension, what it does is, if a student is acting up in class or struggling, to get along or behave, so a student would go and they would receive additional support or instruction, in the specific area, and then be given the opportunity to practice those skills during the school day. We also have alternative to suspension groups that we, partner with Not My Kid. So Project Rewind, for example, if your child is caught using any kind of substance on campus, vaping is huge on our campuses. Alcohol use at, games, that type of thing, we see it. And we would rather have students and their parents attend a class together where, they learn about kind of the harmful impact of substances on the body, on the developing brain, and they open up those lines of communication. And so the feedback, from those groups has been really, really positive. So our social workers, may help facilitate some of those referrals. So, we use it in lieu of suspension, or an alternative, it's a diversion program, but we've partnered with Not My Kid. And so any family that is interested or concerned about their child, they can go to Project Rewind for free. And so, if you've got an 8th grader and you caught them with a vape, you don't have to wait for them to be caught at school, or you're concerned, or you have, these fears, or you're not quite sure how to open up, that line of communication. Parents, you can go to Project Rewind for free. So they oftentimes are, the person on campus where maybe a parent feels more comfortable talking to the social worker. Maybe they're not concerned about discipline, or they're not concerned that their child is going to get in trouble. So they might make some of those referrals. And then we also engage in restorative circles. And so a lot of times, students engage in, what would be considered hurtful behavior, but they have no idea how their behavior impacted another person. And so if both students, are willing, we can bring them together to have what we call a restorative circle. So that helps them have a better understanding of their behavior, how it impacted another person, maybe the harm that it caused. And then at the end, we talk about, what does this relationship look like moving forward? Are we best friends again? Are we going to tolerate each other? What does this look like? And, when you show up in math class, 5th period, are you going to talk to each other? Do you not talk to each other? What do you say? And walk them through that, so they're not in this uncomfortable, awkward situation when they actually do come in contact, because it's been practiced and they know what to expect. And so that has been really just kind of an awesome intervention that we've been able to put in place that has prevented, future situations from occurring. And then tier 3, where we're looking at, again, more of those significant behaviors, more, serious kind of mental health issues on our campus, our social workers support with brief solution-based counseling, where they might see a student, anywhere from like 3 to 7 sessions, to work on an identified goal, okay? If a student, and again, with the hopes of removing some of those barriers so students are able to access academics. They're not there to provide therapy or long-term, counseling, anything like that. That is where, we partner with a lot of the different community organizations, and, social workers will work with families to make those referrals. So they can help connect, a family to a community organization that they can go to either for family support or individual support. And that's really that mental health referral. We also have students that, do share with us that they have thoughts of hurting themselves, thoughts of killing themselves. Last year, the average elementary school completed 5 risk assessments for suicidal ideation. Our middle schools had 17 on average, risk assessments for suicidal ideation, and our high schools were at 29. And so, and that was just, the average, because obviously we've got, one high school that has just under 1,000 students, and we've got some that are close to 2,400. So average was 29. And those were students where, they either self-referred, or perhaps a parent called and said, I'm concerned, a teacher said, I'm concerned, or a friend came and said, I'm concerned. And so when we move forward with that risk assessment, yes, a student has indicated that they want to hurt themselves or not wake up or die. So that's what those risk assessments are. This social worker would then, work with the school team, and if needed, help with a safety plan, okay, to make sure that, those mental health or those, needs, again, are being met while, that student is at school. So again, they are able to access that education and academics to the best of their ability. We also, have our social workers, they are part of a threat assessment team. So that team is led by campus administration, but they are ones that will help with some of the interviews. And so oftentimes, they might be interviewing the student, the peers, they might be doing a mental health, screening if needed, as part of that threat assessment. And a threat assessment is where a student would indicate that they want to hurt themselves. Oftentimes they indicate that they want to hurt themselves as well as, another person. With those threat assessments, it's not necessarily that a student has said something, although we take all of those, threats seriously. Oftentimes those are transient, but sometimes, a student may pose a threat, right? And so things are, posted or implied, outside of school, or something has been done, and that information is reported, to the school. And so we, of course, want to make sure that, we take all of those, concerns seriously, and we're addressing those issues. So they help with some of those support plans or those safety plans as well. So when you look at, just kind of everything that goes on, I guess, behind the scenes, we know that our students are in classroom and they're learning and, math, reading, writing, right? But there's a lot that, happens in that day-to-day, classroom or on campus, across campus, where, students are impacted, whether it's, a simple stressor or, something much more significant. And our social workers are really there, to help provide the supports to students, provide supports to families, increase awareness, then connect, families, administrators, teachers, everybody to resources to make sure, that our students are able to function and really do, perform their personal best. And I think that is it. I have the next slide with my name if anybody wants to reach out. But that really kind of just wraps up the role of the social worker. So I don't know if you guys have questions or, thoughts. Yes. So law enforcement is a part of our threat assessment team. And so most of the time, 90% of the time, threats are transient. So somebody says something, I'm going to kill you, or I'm going to kick your, after school. They say it because they have poor problem solving skills. Their anger, it's more of a statement versus like a true intent to harm. At any point in time where we feel that a situation may be more of a substantive threat, right? There is an intent to harm. Perhaps the student has access to weapons, access to, a way to hurt another person. We would bring in law enforcement if it's more of that substantive threat. So, and a lot of times, law enforcement, they're the ones that come to us and say this was reported, and we are conducting our own, investigation. So they have to deal with it, on the law side, and then we have to make sure that our students are safe at school. So, and I always say, at any point in time, even if we think it's transient, if there's a doubt and we're concerned about a student's immediate safety, especially with risk or threat assessments, we bring in law enforcement and partner with them. And I think one of the things, just to make sure I'm clear about this, is, our law enforcement, our SROs, and our schools, like we partner in a way that's meant to be very supportive. And so not this, caught you, right? We don't want students to be concerned or scared, of our officers on campus. We've got, a crisis canine program in 3 of our schools. So, the officers have crisis dogs. When we have had, a crisis on campus, they go to the different campuses, and yeah, they're awesome, right? Yes. Mm-hmm. And the kids, yeah. 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 And so they are assigned to the different campuses, but they work with our entire district. So when we do have, a crisis or a need, the dog will go and with, the officer and help provide that support. So our students, I have to say, for the most part, love our SROs, and they really do feel like they are there to support students. We've had, teen town halls where we've tried to have a better understanding of, what our students are thinking. And the students that are, helping plan those events have requested, that we include our SROs on the panel. So I cannot stress enough that it's really what we want students to know is that they're there to help. If you see something, say something, they're a great person to say something to. They take it seriously and much less worried about getting you in trouble than, getting you the support, right? The difference between tattling and reporting. And, they're a great person to report. So I hope that we've, are able to kind of lower that, that fear factor. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Great question. So prior to the grant, we had, it depended on the year, but between 4 and 5 social workers. And then we applied for the grant, and they awarded schools in different phases. So there's 3 different tiers. So there's school safety expansion, and then an ESSER funded grant. And through that grant, we were lucky or fortunate enough to get all of our schools funded. They did share that there's going to be a reapplication process, for the grant. They are supposed to release more information about that in November. So my fingers are crossed. I'm hopeful that, if schools have been awarded the grant, that maybe, they will continue with another grant cycle. I don't know if that's the case. That's me hoping that that's the case. We've had conversations or engaged in those conversations regarding the sustainability of those positions. I think, our leadership team, our site administrators, staff really, values the work of our social workers, understands, that there's a need right now, especially just what we're seeing with, that social, the academic, and the behavior needs of our students. So much of it really boils down to, what's going on in their lives and their, the behavior, right? I mean, you have to have those basic needs met before you're in a place where you're really ready to learn. So my hope is that we are going to be able to sustain those positions either through grant funding or through another creative way. So we're very aware that, it's coming to an end and concerned about it and having those conversations. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. A couple of our schools do have split, social workers. We also work very closely with JFCS, which is Jewish Family Children Services. And so we've had a long history of working with JFCS. And that was, prior to, receiving social workers. Our middle schools and high schools have school counselors. And they also had the social worker support, because that's where we really kind of see the onset of some more serious mental health issues. And so our elementary schools have been supported through JFCS, and they would come on, campus one day a week and run some of those psychoeducational programs. They would do a lot of classroom presentations, more of that tier 1. During COVID and, as situations have evolved, one of our goals was to not take any kind of resource away from a campus, right? We wanted to add resources and add support, not take away. And so we have been able to, continue funding the JFCA support as well as, the social worker support. Yes. Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah. Well, so this past cycle, it was 3 years, but they were awarded at different times. And so we're anxiously awaiting more information to see what that looks like. So I really don't have an answer. Yeah.
And schools apply individually, or we do it as a district?
So we did it as a district through support services. And so right now, all of those grants are under support services. Yeah. Yes.
Can you explain how, what are some of the things that teachers do in the classroom not to minimize, but to keep the things in-house as opposed to going to social workers or raising the level from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3?
Yeah, absolutely. So, that would be really kind of those classroom-based interventions. So what we call is, tier 1, right? So differentiating instruction. A lot of times if, a student is not able, to perform academically, what we see is them acting out. And so it's important that our teachers are, differentiating to different learning levels in the classroom. We also have a MTSS coach where their team, will work with teachers that maybe are struggling. Maybe they've got some different behaviors in their classroom, but making sure that we've got, solid classroom practices in place. And so really what that means is looking at, have routines and procedures been taught? And I'll just give you an example of why this is important. So if I'm a 9th grade student and I'm in English and my English teacher doesn't care if I sit in her desk, like, cool, that works in that class, right? Now I go to social studies and the social studies teacher does not want me to come anywhere near their desk, right? And when I do, I'm in trouble. So there's different expectations in the different classrooms. And so sometimes we take for granted and we say students know how to behave, sort of, most of the time. I mean, they do, they want to please us, but we have to teach those behavioral expectations. Where you turn in your work in one classroom is going to be very different from where you turn in your work in another classroom. And so we really need our teachers, to make sure, that they have an understanding of what are their own, routines and procedures, and that, those routines and procedures are taught and reinforced and practiced, in the classroom. Opportunities to respond. So, this direct instruction is great, but making sure, that our students are engaged and, giving them different, ways to respond, whether it's writing an answer on a whiteboard and holding it up, moving to a different corner of the room, having a conversation with, their desk partner, whatever it might be, but making sure, that students are engaged in learning. Behavior-specific praise, for example, is another one. If I just say, to a student, great job, well, they oftentimes have no idea what they just did. That's great, okay? But if we can name that behavior, we increase the likelihood that we're going to see it again. So maybe somebody has not been to class on time for the past 3 weeks, and you're like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. You're on time today, and you're sitting down in your desk or in your seat, and you are ready to learn with your book out and your paper out. I cannot wait to teach you. Okay, well, now they just know what they did, right? I showed up on time, I found my desk, I sat down, I've got my book out, I've got my paper out, and a pencil. So we just increase the likelihood that we're going to see those same behaviors again. So that behavior-specific praise is so important. What we really want to see is, 5 positive, phrases for every 1 redirection or negative. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with John Gottman. He's a psychologist and a relationship expert. So it's really, that whole behavior-specific phrase is based off of his work. And quickest way to change, just behavior in a classroom is through praise. So we've got those 7 different classroom strategies. And so when we've got teachers that are kind of struggling, maybe with, the behaviors, or, we oftentimes, there's not a lot of opportunity, for really kind of learning, these strategies when you're in your undergrad or even in grad school, right? It looks very different when you actually show up and you have your own classroom. And so our coaches will go out and, kind of take inventory of how are we doing in these different practices and what area would you like to improve upon? And then they coach and they work with that teacher, provide different ideas, and that follow up. So that has been something that we've been really busy doing this year. But absolutely, those are the type of, practices that we want to see in place, making sure that our students are in a classroom where, they're able to learn. And then if they're the ones that are really kind of struggling, the student, that we would elevate that to more of a tier 2. Yes. So a great question. A lot of times teachers will come forward and just say, I'm struggling. You've got, a tough kiddo in your class that is tearing apart a classroom or, struggling. They embrace and want the help. We have to normalize it, and it cannot be seen as something that's punitive. We've got some tough kiddos, and and our teachers really, really try so hard and try their best. And sometimes, they just don't have tools, any more tools in their box that are working with that specific student. And so, encouraging, them, letting them know that we've got a team of people that are, willing to come out and help, support that need, and making sure that, their feelings are validated, that, yeah, these are really tough behaviors. What we're seeing today looks very different from what we saw, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. Here's some ideas, and, having that person kind of show back up, and, provide feedback in a way that's positive and supportive, I think is really what, has kind of let people's guard down and made them willing to either ask for help. We do have some administrators that will say, I'm concerned about, a certain teacher, like, could we provide, additional support? And so, it'll be a conversation, but a lot of it is, the teacher, finding out through conversation that these supports are available and, wanting that extra help, in their classroom. And sometimes it's, I've never struggled with behavior, but I am seeing behaviors that I've never seen before, and I don't know how to deal with it. And that's okay. Our students are so different today than they were, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It just, being a classroom teacher looks so different. And I think really just acknowledging that and validating, people's experiences is what has helped them feel comfortable. But yeah, it's hard. Yeah. I don't know. What do you guys think? Am I? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? No. All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And yeah, if you guys have any other questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm here to help and support. And like I said, I'm a parent myself, so we're all in this together. So thank you.
Okay, up next, we have some executive board updates. Kirsten, do you want to give the budget update? No? Yeah?
I'm Kirsten. I'm the treasurer for SBC board. It's really hard to see, but we have a small budget that is mainly used for facilitating events, communication, making sure we can do email and have a website, et cetera. So you can see that we are mostly spending on just kind of those events, streaming and all the business stuff, the admin. And we are looking for donations. So we have now achieved about $700 in school donations. We ask for $100 per school, usually facilitated from the PTO. There's a lot of schools that have not yet donated, so there's reminders going out. But if you are here from one of the schools that hasn't and can help us out, that would be great, because all of that goes back into events like this. And we also have some individual giving as well as passive fundraising through Amazon Smile and grant applications. Anything else that you think we should cover? Okay, any questions? I can get you a list. I should have put that list together, but yeah, I can share that list.
Okay, we have, I'm going to go through our upcoming events. So our next general meeting will be here. It's a morning meeting on Wednesday, November 16th, and we're going to hear about SUSD's communications department. So we're going to hear from Christine Harrington, and we're also going to have, and I'm totally blanking on his name. So Christine is head of communications, and we're also going to have the person who is in charge of strategic partnerships, like with business, come talk as well. Do you want to, Larissa, you're here.
Yes, we're going to next, Thursday. It was Wednesday. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so next Thursday, October 26th, in this room, we'll be having IEP training by Dr. Brooke Williams, the Director of Special Ed, and it'll answer all questions about what is an IEP, what's the difference between IEP and 504, and we'll have parents there like myself, Andrea, and Robin to also just share information and our experiences. So if you know anybody who's beginning that road, please share that with them and encourage them to join us. Yeah. If you want to come and learn, so you have that background knowledge in case
Yeah, maybe, yeah, you're right.
it's Wednesday.
It's Wednesday. Ignore the Thursday. It is the 26th. The day is wrong. The number is correct. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Now we have some, or if you are a rep and you have an announcement, let me know. I have a phone call coming in for an announcement. One of our dedicated reps is in Jamaica and wants to make an announcement. Larissa, I think do you have one? Okay. Yeah, well, she hasn't called yet, so let me.
Okay.
I'll go quick. So I'm Adrienne Bass. I'm from Pima. And Mr. Hodo asked me to share with you guys that Pima recently received a grant for a program called Amira for the K-3 program to help them with their reading fluency. And it's an AI program that lets them read short passages, and then it gives the kids feedback on how they read. So they're really excited to get that going with their K-3 grade levels. And then just a shout out or an invitation. If you're available on the last Friday of any month and you want to come and hang out with us at Pima for our flag ceremony, it's a sight to behold. If you've ever met Mr. Hodo, he's like the most mild-mannered, professional principal, and he becomes MC Hodo at these flag ceremonies. You have to see it. It's precious. Kids love him. It's a great show. We honor our teachers, support staff, PTO parent, etc. So all are invited. Flag ceremony at Pima last Friday of the month, 8:40.
Okay, I'm going to put Bryn on speaker. Okay, our next update is from Bryn DeFusco and Kokopah. So Bryn, you're on speakerphone and I'm putting you up to the microphone.
Okay. Thank you so much for letting me call in, Kim. I apologize I'm not there. I'm out of town right now. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Bryn, and I am the representative from Kokopah Middle School, and I just wanted to give a real quick update on something that happened on Kokopah's campus. It's a good thing, but I didn't mean to lead into that in a negative way. On Saturday, October 1st, the district, along with the Scottsdale Police Department, Scottsdale Fire Department, and Honor Health, conducted a mock full-scale active shooter simulation on campus. And the purpose of the simulation was to test the various organizations' emergency response plans, which in the event of an actual active shooting situation would have to work together seamlessly. One of the biggest takeaways from this was the effectiveness of the security cameras that are on COCOPA's campus. They were incredibly helpful in assisting the police and the emergency crews. Specifically, the cameras allowed the police to locate and isolate the active shooter while also allowing them to identify safe evacuation routes for the people, obviously, students and staff members who were on campus. So that was the biggest takeaway from this simulation, the efficacy of these cameras. And in speaking with Dr. Menzel and others, the DAA override includes multiple categories that can be used to enhance security, including technology like security cameras. So, but just wanted to let everyone know that the drill went very well. That's the biggest takeaway was the effectiveness of these cameras, and they will be part of the funding in the override would allow more campuses to either upgrade or add more of these security cameras.
Thank you, Bryn.
Hi, I'm Larissa Beckstead. I am from Chaparral. So a couple of exciting things have happened. Saturday, October 8th, Chaparral Firebird Marching Band competed in the Las Vegas Regional Invitational Marching Band Competition at Green Valley High School in Henderson, Nevada. The Firebirds placed second overall and won the High Music Award or the award for Best Music Performance. So yay, go Firebirds. We celebrated our 50th anniversary in conjunction with homecoming on September 30th. We were able to host several former admins, longtime CHAP educators, and famous alum for recognition and the football game. Dr. Creehart came back for that because he was actually a principal there. And we continue to communicate and promote our core values of compassion, honest, agility, and perseverance with staff and students. Feedback from staff and students so far is that things are going well and that people are generally happy with the direction of the school. So.
Thank you. Any other updates? No. Okay. So that is it for today. There are still some note cards around. If you guys have ideas for meetings, future topics of general meetings, you could write on a note card, because you could also email me, but it's easier to write it on the note card. But thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you next month.